these are the issues. And so there's a kind of transparency, which I think is really critical for for any kind of assessment, but especially in this case, for participants. They need to know what it is they're trying to do and what they're trying to get their students to do. So in this case, a learning-centered activity, communicative task, these are the critical features to get the student speaking. Stage 2, focusing on target language, moving towards objectives. So then these are my cheat sheet notes. This is for a productive lesson. So, is there some opportunity for fluency? Is the target language appropriate? Do they convey meaning? So now I'm upping the game a little bit for the participants. And here again, in planning and lesson planning and in the workshops, we've talked about these points. And we say, hey, keep doing your communicative tasks, but here now we want to see some of this as well. And this will help you so that your students can actually learn something. So that would be for a productive lesson. And notice here, it's a student-centered way to EC the target language. We want them to have some opportunities to practice, but I have found that most of the time what happens is that participants, they get so caught up trying to present the target language that the practice is kind of minimal. And then they try to squeeze in a use activity at the end, a fluency activity. So, that's fine for that stage. I think it's sort of normal. Every participant's different, but this is what I've noticed often happens. A receptive skills lesson, I'm looking for like a pre-activity, that there's a clear reading or listening task. There's some sort of post or reading or listening task. Again, is the skeleton there? Is there a flow? Their listening tasks might be all over the place. They might really need adjusting, But if I see that flow, then I'm like, yeah, you're on target here. And again, maybe they have a great listening task and no post listening task. Well, then that's something that you can kind of check off and like, it's sort of like the ride on the amusement park a little bit, I think. If you're not this tall, you don't get to move on. Well, I don't want to focus too much on the stage 3 things if they haven't got this stuff, because I feel like it's putting the cart before the horse a little bit. So then stage 3, we're trying to integrate all of it. And hopefully we're seeing some really strong lessons now by week 4. Receptive skills lesson there. I'll give you a sec to scan through that. I think one of the key things is the final bullet point there, monitoring individual students and responding to their needs. And I think this is what Ron was talking about, that reflection in action. Not just like, teaching the plan, but teaching students. Sorry, this is the second piece of that. Oh, I'm sorry, I think this is I meant to say productive lesson instead of receptive lesson here. So again, this idea of adjusting, they might need to adjust the activities and fine-tune them, but the activities are there. And now it's like, okay, how could you make that practice activity a little bit more effective or a little bit more student-centered? How could you adjust the target language a bit? So the last bit, I think, is this idea of communicating with the participants. And so, as I mentioned before, you can do this in lesson planning, that you're really transparent about what it is that you want the participants to focus on. And one of the things that we try to do here in Berkeley too is we try to use the record book. So we say to them, okay, like we're doing a workshop. So tomorrow we'll be doing a workshop on comprehension check questions and review clarifying meaning for a vocabulary word. We'll be doing something about aspects of knowing a word. And we can pull out the record book and say, so after the session, where is that? and so that the participants start to see the record book and use it. So they dip into it, and it becomes something that's really helpful for them in their development. As I mentioned before, we like to copy and paste those bullet points into our notes, and so then we can just use this. We use a chart like this: strengths, areas to work on, and then we can just slide them in there. We usually, in Berkeley, what we do is we take notes on our computers, and we do feedback, and then we, that evening or the next morning, we sort of flesh out this part, this sort of summary of the lesson, and we write them a little note, and then send it to them. So I like to have a little bit of time to do that. It's not always possible, but on some of the intensive courses, but I think it's nice because it helps them focus because they get so much. Yeah, so and I guess I've already mentioned this, assigning the practice teaching, look at the record book, this is what we're focusing on. There were some other concerns, but maybe assign PT. So when what I mentioned is when you assign the practice teaching, you look at the record book and say, what is it that that we're working on in today's, in this practice teaching, this time. Okay, Susan says, okay. Maybe let's just do a quick 2-minute chat with your partner, and then we'll open it up again if you have comments about this. I realize it's 2:04 now, so hopefully you can hang in there for a couple more minutes. Okay. I think we're going to start needing to wrap up here, but before we do that, I just wanted to. Did anybody want to quote unquote raise their hand and offer some comments? And then, other than that, I'll wrap up. But I'd love to hear any comments that you guys have. And I'm happy to stay on longer. I know we were set to go till 2, but if people want to stay on, I'm happy to chat longer. If you need to go, I totally understand. And there was a question about PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint, I'll email it to Kevin, and he'll have it. He'll make it available. Autumn asked me a question. Is it okay if I answer this question to the whole group? Okay. Autumn asked the question, have I used the checklist to help with peer observations? Absolutely. All the way through, really. I think the key is transparency, because the whole thing with assessment is if you know, as a participant, if I know what I need to focus on, then I can work toward that in a very deliberate way. This idea of deliberate practice, right? And so, and then the participants can talk to each other about that in the planning, in the reflection. And so it's all about this framing and knowing what your goal is and what your target is. I'm sorry, I don't know if I said Autumn's question. She said, have I used it have I used the checklist to help with peer observations? And Kevin is saying that he will post the video of this session on Moodle, where we can have a follow-up discussion. And Autumn is saying, oh, she wrote it to all. Okay. I agree. I think it's really important to have those checklists first, so that people can, and yes, that's a great point, that they can move toward creating their own checklists. That people have other things that they want to work on. But I think it's important, because this is a high stakes decision, that is that you have to pass or not pass. So, a participant. So it's important to be clear about that and honest. If you want to work on your singing voice in class, then you may not pass the course. Other folks want to add comments? And people are free to unmic themselves or unmute themselves if they want to jump in.
Hey, thanks, Josh.
Yeah, who's that?
David, really interesting, very, very good.
Okay, great, Dave, thanks. And Ron says that it was helpful for him. Good. Okay, well, I did want to mention, just to share with you, there were some other interesting concerns that maybe we can continue in our discussion on Moodle or through the lister. This was one comment. Linda sent something. The stages and bullet points. Yeah, kind of marrying those stages and bullet points. Yeah. One person's concern was here Ps often have their own agenda and priority list. It's not always easy to both acknowledge and address their needs and get to what the trainer thinks. And so I think that's exactly what just came out, is that if we're transparent about it, we can then negotiate with them about, this is what we need you to work on to pass the course, and great if you want to work on this as well. And I was being facetious about the singing voice, but people do have other things that they want to work on, and that's cool. But we just need to make sure that they also meet the minimum standards for our course. Another concern, these came from the survey the Survey Monkey, where there was the thing at the bottom where people could write. To what end is my own assessment of the teacher necessary? How can my own assessment be delayed, or failing that, how can I de-emphasize external assessment as an element of the process? And, I think this is an interesting point, but I think we have to be clear that we ultimately we have to decide if they're going to pass or not pass the course. So that's where I think that transparency is really important. And I totally appreciate this trainer's desire to delay their own assessment, but it's, from a participant's point of view who's really concerned about passing, I think that that can be very frustrating too, because they're like, how am I doing here? What am I working on? How can they build up some inner criteria to know that they're going in the right direction? And then somebody wrote, is there a decisive grade for passing the course? How can I decide it? And I think that's what we've been talking about today. So I hope this conversation continues. One of the ways that we talk here in Berkeley is we talk about, like, if I come out of a session and James comes out of a session or Jeff comes out of a session or Jen, I can say, so how was it? And they say, weak stage 1. And I know what they mean. Or they say, strong stage 2. And I know what they mean. Decent stage 2. I know what they mean. So, you know, we as trainers start to get a shorthand based on those stages. And it's really interesting how helpful that's been for us. And then there was one more concern here about with non-native speakers, non-native speaking Ps are teaching. How much of all do we focus on the target form? I think this is an important point, but I think a lot of times that this needs to really be dealt with in the application process too. And being clear about what we expect. In Berkeley, we expect a very high level, but obviously when I was in Georgia last year and I was training Georgian teachers, then I really didn't make that the priority. I wanted to just focus on, stage 1. So that's it on my end for the webinar, for the slides. Like I said, I'm happy to hang out and talk more. Let's see here. Yeah, Ron says the balance in feedback between simply describing and telling. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but and then it's a question of describing what, and so where do we focus them? Because that's where we can spend DIGPA. We can use DIGPA to focus on stage 1 issues or stage 2 issues or stage 3 issues. So. So
maybe this
Kevin
is better done.
Kevin wanted to say something, I think. Let me wrap up.
I'm going to have to duck out, actually, but I just wanted to say thanks, everybody, for coming and just kind of frame the webinar series. I know some of you were part of the meetings we had last fall, and this is really an extension of that. And really what we want to do is try to bring trainers together, for our own continued development as trainers, really, and whether it's norming around competencies or some of the other things that we're going to talk about on these webinars. So this year we're piloting this and trying to find an outlet or a venue where we can come together, and it looks like GoToMeeting so far has worked quite well. So I just wanted to say thanks for coming, and we're going to have at least 2 more of these this year, and hopefully continue the discussions on Moodle and on the listserv. And if these go well, then this will be something that we can increase and do more of in the future. So that's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Josh. It's really been great. I've learned a lot. So.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah,
really stimulating.
Oh, great. I'm glad. Cool. If anybody's here, I'm willing to hang out for a little bit more, but if people got to go, they got to go.
Susan, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want me to expand on what I meant by...
Yeah. Telling versus telling. And
well, in our when we take notes and whatnot and give feedback, I think there's a whole continuum of some trainers who feel you only describe what happened in the class. Teacher, student, description. So and leaving it open for the P to make their own interpretations of what happened, noticing by way of the description. There's no direction given by the trainer as to what went well or didn't go well. No advice or anything like that. All the way to the other end, where you say you really need to do this kind of thing. it's much more directive. And I'm always battling myself between those two, somewhere between those two extremes, where I don't want to necessarily just tell the participant what they did that was good or what they did that was not good. But I find myself, moving as the course goes on towards the end, being a little more directive, especially if the participants, in a sense, not getting it. They're still not giving good directions, or still not doing this or that. That is an objective of the course. And I don't know if others of you feel that same kind of tug of war.
Welcome to Go-To Meeting. There are 5 other callers on the call.
Where is it?
It's in the chat box there. James, you want to just talk? Or?
Yeah, say, like, I think that this is basically what we're talking about earlier, right? Like, what stage is the meeting right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ron, what you're getting at too is that there is that tension on the course between being able to, improve one's actual teaching skills and also improve one's reflection skills. And I think what can be hard though for participants is when it gets a little overwhelming, and I think when they're uncertain about what it is that they need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we do need to be kind of directive. We say, look, you need to get more student-student interaction. I would tell that guy, if I was doing feedback with him, the guy from the YouTube video, I would say, look, you need to get some pair work at work. And we can talk about that. Like, why is it important to get pair work? We can describe like how many students actually got a chance to speak and for how much, and hopefully he would have a little bit of an aha. But ultimately, I'm going to guide him toward passing the course. If he doesn't get that aha, I'm going to tell him to do pair work next.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because sometimes, the tendency is for some to say, no, you never say, tell them directly what to do. But my feeling is they're paying good money for your expertise, for one thing.
Well, I don't think you want to leave them guessing.
And you don't want to leave them guessing what to do.
Exactly.
Well, along those lines, Susan, I'm just wondering if there's ever been a conversation about having the trainer be one of the first people who speak in the conversation at the beginning of the course. Because sometimes you need to go through a lot of participants talking about their own experience, and then participants to be very nice at the beginning to the participant that they just watched teach. And before you know it, half an hour is gone, and now it is the fact that there's been zero interaction in the class.
Yeah. But we had a participant actually quit the second or third night because another participant was so hard on her, directly to her in his feedback, that she felt offended and quit the course before we could even talk to her.
Well, that's where I'm wondering, the trainer being one of the
That's
first
still a state.
we're trained to look for the positive no matter what. Whatever we saw, even in that guy that was a random guy on YouTube, we said, good that you based it, Cynthia and I were talking about, based it in a real life circumstance and pass on to them. So you might not